It's now time for this month's broadcast of Learning Now TV.
Kate, it is July. In fact, it's the end of July, and we look out at the pouring rain and think, maybe August will be better. Let's hope so. But what we have got that's good is Learning Now TV. And tell us all about July's programme, Kate. The sunny July LNTV programme.
A bright spot in the wet Welsh summer. So we have got you talking to Nick Shackleton-Jones, to be a familiar face to many viewers, back on to talk about his take on leadership. Never a dull moment when Nick's around. Martin Cousins joins us to talk about the latest Gallup research, always very wide-reaching, with a great sample base. Is talking about the state of the global workplace, so that's a really good current one for everybody. And also Rob Clark is talking to Cathy Hoy of the CLO 100 initiative, which has been up and running for a while now. Regular viewers will remember she came on originally to talk about the launch, so it'd be great to hear how that's going.
Excellent. Well, enjoy the show. I don't often get the chance to have a conversation with Nick Shackleton-Jones face-to-face, but I've managed it today, and I'm really looking forward to it. Nick is the founder and principal of Shackleton Consulting, and he commutes at the moment between the UK and Warsaw, where he is well-established, or in the process of becoming well-established. He'll be famous all over the world before we can blink. And today we're going to talk about leadership. It's something that Nick is very interested in. He's got a particular take on leadership, and that's what I want to engage him with. So Nick, welcome to Learning Now TV. Thank you for coming on, and tell us a little bit about leadership.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Nigel. You and I go back quite some years. I mean, I've been working on leadership programs since I joined the BBC, actually, just as you were leaving. But before that, I was at Siemens Comms and worked on leadership then, and then at the BBC with a guy called Peter Wallach and Joan Keevil, kind of mutual friend. And we won some awards for what we were doing.
Don't forget BP. You did a whole online leadership.
That's right. From BBC, I went to BP and did a whole bunch of stuff around leadership, inclusive leadership, kind of onboarding, which I think was transformational, certainly for BP and to some extent the industry. And then from there, that bought us a job as a team, I guess. We all went to PA Consulting and did learning innovation, again, a lot of it around leadership for lots of organizations, big banks, United Nations, big pharma. And then I went from PA to kind of Deloitte, looked at leadership as well there. But I think that the thing I really wanted to say is that the thing that made me start to think differently and do different kinds of stuff with leadership was actually the way that we were working, which was human-centered, which meant in practice I was actually talking to leaders. So if we were designing a leadership program, the general way that you do that is you start with some kind of philosophy about leadership. It might be a book, Who Moved My Cheese, or whatever the latest trend was. And you sort of, you inflict that on people, and my experience of that was that people would sort of sit grudgingly through those sessions, but it wouldn't actually help them with the job. And if you actually talk to leaders, which is what human-centered design was all about, talk to your audience, it was just astonishing how misaligned a lot of this kind of leadership learning was. I'll give you a simple example. At BP, we did some analysis of leaders and found out that although the leadership program was talking all about effective team working, 40% of the leaders on the program had no team. They were just kind of sitting through this stuff like, oh, here we go. Here's some stuff on Teams. So this simple idea of actually talking to your audience so you can deliver a better program is very powerful. And over the years, I've applied that. We run focus group with leaders. I've talked to literally, probably well over 1,000 leaders. In a project I was working on just recently for a big airport, we talked to 16 focus groups of leaders to try and find out what they were kind of struggling with, because that's the way to design a better program. But look, here's the point that I was expressing on LinkedIn, and I'll sort of stop babbling, is that people tend to talk in very abstract ways about leadership and, you know, the challenges of leadership and ambiguity and vision and the future. About 90% of what makes you a good leader, certainly at management sort of level, you can fix just by doing the basics. The majority of leaders, when they become a leader for the first time, are just struggling with really fundamental things, like just understanding how to relate to different people in their teams, flexing their style, having difficult conversations, managing a budget, the nuts and bolts, what you might refer to as management. And I don't think that debate has a lot of legs in it. I think management is the basics, the procedural stuff. I think leadership is the more kind of abstract level. But you can be a really good leader just by getting the basics right. You don't have to make it super complex. A lot of the theoretical stuff isn't really going to touch the experience of your employees, your team day to day. What will is if you actually ask the right questions. So a lot of it can be just quite prescriptive, but will make a huge difference.
I agree. My work on leadership as well, I was just overwhelmed by the fact that whatever model you picked was pretty much the same as any other model. And if you picked model over people, you completely miss the context. You know, that my first premise is leadership works in context. We all have a particular role in a particular place at a particular time with particular people. And if you ignore that fact, you don't start where people are. You start with some theoretical abstract concept of being a servant leader or an authentic leader or a transformational leader. You actually miss the point, because when people pick up those big earth-shattering concepts and are thinking, I don't even know how to approach a problem with somebody. I don't know how to have a decent conversation. So my belief is like yours, Nick, that if you don't do your field work, you're wasting your time. And field work is fundamental. Go and talk to the people that you're supposed to be helping, and they'll tell you what the problems are. You agree with me?
Yeah, I do, because I think that abstract, everybody loves a bit of navel gazing. So no leaders are going to object to a program where they get to think about what their leadership style is or kind of how they show up. You know, love it. And some of that, you know, can make a bit of a difference. But what really makes a difference, so I'll give you a very practical example. You become a leader and you've got a new team, and that team are thinking, who the heck is this person? And am I going to enjoy working for them, or is this the time to update my CV? Right? And those first meetings that you have with your team, because you have a one-to-ones with everyone in your team, that's what you do as a new leader. If you don't ask the right questions, then that person will think, oh, maybe I don't want to work for this person. And you can list those questions. You can give people a sheet of questions. And the result is everybody has a great experience, and it's fair. You know, people get asked about what matters to them, how they can be supported, all that sort of stuff. But the thing that I went on to say in that interview on LinkedIn was, or that piece on LinkedIn was, well, couldn't you just automate that? Couldn't you just have AI do that? And the answer is yes, you can. You can have AI do management, but people still need that relationship, because most people are brought up, trained through their parents and through school to want to seek the approval of somebody that they respect. And that you cannot do with AI. So I think it's kind of helpful to think about the future, because it's true, I think, that automation and AI will take care of lots of the procedural stuff better than leaders are doing today, or support, at least in a kind of a hybrid operating model, support leaders and managers. But what won't be replaced is that need for a relationship, for somebody who tells you you're doing a good job, who reassures you, who demonstrates that they care about you, who connects with you, who helps you to think through your development. You know, that is not easy to replace. So I think...
Sorry, Nick, what I was going to say was, when you were talking earlier about people just fail at the first hurdle, that the emotional drain of knowing that you're not doing a good job, it's like pulling along a 3-ton weight behind you. And what you're saying is that human connection, when someone feels someone's got their back, when they feel they're in an environment, a community that is successful and is buzzing, that counts for a lot. And you can't replace that. I agree. You can't replace that with simply an AI bot. The AI bot can get you stuff. It can ask you questions. It can formulate things. It can help the manager hugely. or the leader hugely in getting access to intelligence. But it's building that community. And I think, that if you focus on building happy communities with great people, you're done. That life will continue and things will go well. If that's not your point, it's all about got to be transformational, then it's much harder.
I don't think we're saying this because some people might hear this, think, "Oh, you're a couple of old softies," and maybe we are. but I think that there's good evidence to support the idea that high-performing teams result from an environment. This is Project Oxygen, Google's kind of famous project, where they found if you just put high-performing people together, but you don't have somebody who can engender that spirit of safety, where there's a free flow of ideas, where people contribute and get feedback without feeling threatened, then performance suffers. And the same was true at BP. We did a lot of work around what are the major contributing factors to safety incidents. About 85% of those are human factors, and that ultimately boils down to the culture that the leader has created. So in a very nuts and bolts practical things, it will dent performance and it will affect major things of significance like near misses and incidents. So the leader has to create the right environment, and they do that through those softer skills, something which again is kind of hard to replace with AI.
Yes. And if you ask people what is stopping them doing good work, they'll tell you. They'll tell you the answer. Quite readily, people will say, this is frustrating me. And often there are things that, it's what the point you made at the beginning, it's things that leaders can manage quite easily. And if you can declutter the processes for people, they love you because you've made their life easier. And then you can go on to higher level engagement. But it was in 2010, I think, that Amy Edmondson wrote her book on teaming, saying that if we want high-performing organizations, you need high-performing teams that network together, that link. They're not separate and fighting each other. And we're now 14 years on from there, and you're saying the same thing.
Yeah, but it is incredible how little things have actually developed. So my touchstone was Ram Shriram's book, Leadership Pipeline, which we sort of implemented. And in essence, it sort of says the things that got you to here, won't get you to there. So what gets you to being a leader is typically being really, really good at the job. And the reason that will make you a bad leader is because you start telling other people, no, you do it this way. And all of a sudden you're a micromanager and you've damaged psychological safety and whatever. So at these various transitions, you more or less have to do the opposite to what made you successful and got you the role. And it's a profound insight. But the fact that we just continue in many organizations to promote people just based on you did a good job, off you go. And the catastrophic consequences of this, which you see time and time again, where a new leader comes in and they really struggle with it. Psychologically, I actually, part of the process is we chart the roller coaster experience they have. But what you forget is that's a roller coaster experience for their team. The people lose people. A new leader comes in and half the team goes somewhere else. And, some of those people might be high performers. So it's just this huge, largely unquantified loss of just going about leadership, promotion and development in this completely unstructured kind of conventional way. And it's very damaging.
It is. And when you take someone who really does not know how to have a conversation and doesn't know how to support and facilitate and not just tell, and you put that person through a very expensive program that tells them there's this model here and there are these 16 boxes and you've got to fill those in and this is how you do it. And they must sit there looking, what has this got to do with my life?
The military actually does a really good job of this because they, as many people know, leaders go through officer training, because you can't afford to literally lose people through an inept leader in a kind of a military context. So they're thoroughly trained before they step into that role. And that's through a series of kind of simulators. And why businesses don't even consider doing something similar, or at the very least train people as they transition into a leadership role. I think when I joined BP, we did some analysis and we found that the average person on the leadership program had already been in the organization for 3 to 4 years. So it's probably just remedial training at that point. But the fact that it's like letting people loose on the roads without just figure it out, just off you go. The car crash and the damage that causes for business is just inestimable, I think. But we do it anyway. But there are better things. You can be doing better things, I think.
I think so, and I think that idea of when you become a leader, you join a queue, a slow-moving queue, and eventually you get to the top of the queue and get some up. That's no good. You've got to operate at the moment or before the moment to be useful to it. You've got to give them a portfolio. You've got to give them a kind of case of secrets, if you like, that will give them the confidence to do their job. And if they're confident, that confidence is imbued in the team is successful, that builds the confidence. You get this wonderful, glorious circle of joy in a way, or you have this circle of misery where everyone is struggling.
Let's talk about, I think that's so important, Nigel. That's why I love working on leadership programs, because I think a leader either makes it rain every day, it ruins your summer if you have a bad leader, because every day is stressful, because you've got to deal with this nuisance who is your leader. And because we're in violent agreement, it's perhaps worth referencing colleagues, people like Donald Clark, who I think poo-poos leadership. I disagree, because I think that it's the relational side that's so important. There was an article in Forbes that I referenced, I think, on the LinkedIn thing, where people said that it's a self-report, but for about 75% of people, they said that their manager or leader has as much impact on their mental health as their partner at home. And this is why I think leadership's important, because if you set aside all the management stuff, whether or not somebody's good at their budget planning and the whatever and the project management, because people need to look up and to feel somebody cares about them, it has a huge impact on their day-to-day life, on their well-being and their mental health. If they have an inept leader, somebody who doesn't care about them, who doesn't understand how to flex their style or be inclusive, or is leaking microaggressions every time they go in a room. And so I think leadership, not in some fancy airy-fairy way of the vision and all of that, but just people skills make such a huge difference to people's working lives day to day. So I do think it's important.
Nick, thank you so much. Catch up, I hope, sooner than we have in the past.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you so much.
I hope so. Thanks, Nigel.
At TechWolf, we realised that HR didn't need another HR application. They needed relevant skill data. Our skill data infrastructure works in the background to not only connect HR data, but business systems where employees actually do their work and skills are demonstrated. Our advanced AI structures skill data into a tailored skill framework in the form of a taxonomy and mapping of your jobs to skills. TechWolf creates relevant, granular skill profiles for every employee. Our API then automatically gets that skill data into the systems where it can be used by the business. We also take privacy very seriously, and TechWolf is trusted by global companies.
And next up, we continue our series with the Charity Learning Consortium. And this month, Michelle Parry-Slater is talking to the Children's Society. We're talking to Natasha Wellborn and Kat Brand around the complete restructure of their talent development programme. So no small undertaking. Enjoy.
Last time on Learning Now TV, I was talking to you about how we need to use the data and how we need to use the data to get our foundations right. So I'm super excited to have the Children's Society with us today, because they really have looked into getting those foundations right. From those foundations, they can set up for future success. But it's enough of me talking about what they're going to tell you. Let's hear it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. So welcome, Tash. Welcome, Kat. Do tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do. Tash?
Hi there, I'm Natasha Wellborn. I'm the Talent Development Specialist at the Children's Society.
And I'm Kat Brandt. I'm the Talent Development Partner at the Children's Society. Thanks for having us today.
You're very welcome. Big focus on talent and those foundations, really. Talk us through, who are the Children's Society? What do you actually do?
So the Children's Society is a charity that's been set up in the UK for a very long time. We're over 150 years old, and we work to support and empower young people across England in really difficult situations. A lot of our programmes and services cover things like child sexual exploitation, children's rights and advocacy, county lines and criminal exploitation, as well as mental health, people missing from home, poverty, and so on. We work to try and create hope in their families, in the community, and in the broader sense that they're living in, trying to affect change from both the government level, but also at a local level as well.
So really focusing on some difficult situations there. Well, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. So what internally, what were the issues that you were dealing with rather than externally looking?
So we'd gone through a large period of change around 2020. The organisation restructured and reorganised itself ahead of setting a new strategy leading from 2020 to 2030. So what we came into at that time was a lot of change in the organisation. We'd seen the learning and development environment change significantly. At the time before the restructure, there were support happening in individual teams, lots of different specialists or knowledge groups happening in different parts of the organisation, which meant that there was lots of information, lots of courses, lots of different pieces happening in different places. So when Kat came in, and then myself soon after, we were finding that when those roles were dissolved or changed, that a lot of that information went with the people who left. So it left us with lots of information, but not necessarily a way to store it, not necessarily a way to cleanly share it, and not a way to make advantage of the way that people had been taught before. So a big part of the work that we needed to do was create some consistency in our language, some consistency in how we tracked, and also avoid any confusion over who owned what and where you could find the information.
Okay, so did you have some holes in sort of things? You found that you had some stuff but not others. You didn't have a sort of consistent foundation.
No, not at all. So what we found is that there were a lot of information that was set up for things like COVID and making sure that we had good and active COVID responses through our e-learning systems. But after that, what we found is that some training was stored on our SharePoint, some were shared in old files and old systems and processes. And because we'd lost those people who were looking after them, it was hard to track down exactly where things should be or where they lived. Even harder still was that the budget wasn't centralised. So some teams had lots of different funding and resources available, and other teams didn't have that as funding. So coming into a more central function, we took the time to make sure that we could make sure everything was on a consistent branding, that it was easier to navigate, and that consistency could be in place. What we really wanted to make sure we were doing was making sure that every user had a consistent experience with us, and that they could find the connections to the wider organisation where they needed to, as well as in their own teams. Because when we came in, we found that that was just really lacking, and it meant that there was a lack of trust in what they could find when they were coming to look for learning and development opportunities.
It's a little bit of a postcode lottery, really. It just depends which department you landed in as to what your experience was.
Yes. Definitely.
Okay, so what did you do about that? Did you just start to pool it together, or was there something a little bit more sophisticated?
Initially, what we did was review the content that we had online. So some of the biggest parts that we did were review the resources and collate them all together. There was a larger piece of strategic thinking, though, that took place within this, and I'll hand over to Kat to discuss that in terms of how we then pulled that together and had a consistent plan.
Thanks, Tash. So we started really by listening to people about what their experience was. So that's how we knew that people weren't able to easily access our content, that they were finding it really hard to navigate. Sometimes they'd find a piece of brilliant content, and when they went back to share it, they couldn't find it again. So we really listened to that. We looked at the survey data that we had from around 4-week reviews, from exit interviews and things like that as well. And we really used that to inform how we could connect this with what we were trying to serve our employees with. So a couple of things came into that kind of strategic piece, thinking about how we link what we were doing to the Children's Society as a whole, and really I suppose align the messaging. So as part of the restructure that Tash was talking about, there was a whole branding revamp that happened, that fighting for hope really came through, and that was something that we felt was missing within the L&D brand itself. So we really wanted to make sure that it felt connected to our people and what they're doing every day, and that they were able to easily access that content and feel like they could share it as well with their colleagues, take that information and put it to use, put it into practice, rather than it just sitting on their computer in the back office in a retail store, or sitting on their computer when they're talking to their colleagues.
It sounds a little bit like you were sort of giving energy to this brand of L&D, really, but it sits within a more holistic space. It wasn't just L&D that you were thinking about then. Was this the whole sort of people experience?
Yeah, absolutely. So Michelle Clark, who is our brilliant Executive Director of Diversity and Talent, brought in this people experience framework. And that is really the lens that we see the organisation through as diversity and talent, but we really encourage others to be using that lens as well. And it means that when we're doing something, we're really thinking about the 4 quadrants that make up that people experience framework. So you mentioned, Michelle, getting the basics right. We want to make sure that people have a voice, that they feel valued, and that we have inspirational leadership. So when we're thinking about a piece of work, we're making sure that we're actively bringing those 4 quadrants into the way that we design, and that user experience is a massive part of that.
What was the impact as a result then? You've gone sort of big picture, what about somebody working in your organisation? What did it look like for them? What was their impact? It's
different across different areas of the organisation, to be completely honest. I'd love to say it was fantastic and everything went immediately well. But I think the impact immediately was for our new starters, and that is always going to be a continual work in progress. There's always going to be improvements that we can make to all of our processes. But just coming into what we call the learning zone, which is the Moodle platform, coming in and seeing the branding that feels familiar. It feels like it's really easy to navigate, and I know what's expected of me, at least within my first couple of weeks of joining this Children's Society, but hopefully well beyond that as well. So that's one of the immediate experiences that we've had, is that people felt like they were able to get the right information at the right time when they're first joining us. Beyond that, I think the energy is different across the organisation. So some people that have been here, we've got people who've been working here 15, 20 years. It's a different piece of engagement about trying to draw them back to the platform, because it was really something that people touched on when they needed to do compliance training. And then they left it, they walked away, and they thought learning doesn't happen in that space. So it's really trying to shift that thinking to actually there is useful information here, and it's a great place to start and then build on those topics and those different learnings. So we really try to encourage people to see it as a blended approach. I think the impact there we're still going to be seeing over time. But we are seeing more traffic coming back to the platform. We are seeing people use the resources. And one of the biggest things that we've noticed is teams reaching out to us, subject matter experts reaching out to us and saying, how do I get my content in that platform? Because I can see how useful it is. And actually, it's going to save me time to be able to have something that's sustainable and really accessible for all of our audiences at the Children's Society. So they're two of the biggest ones, I would say.
It certainly sounds like you're moving towards a learning culture in the organisation, especially if people are now asking and offering content to you. So many times in L&D, we get confused that content equals learning, and that's not true at all. This foundation that you've been talking about here, using the people experience framework, I think it's a really insightful way of making sure you're delivering what needs to be delivered. Thank you so much to Tash and to Kat for talking to us today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Upskill and inform your learners with Mind Tools for Business. Empower your people to thrive at work and help them step up and meet everyday workplace challenges with confidence. Our toolkit provides unlimited access to thousands of quality-assured resources, all in one place. It's easy to use and on demand, anytime, anywhere. Experience stress-free onboarding with dedicated client partner support. And get access to our library of industry insight and expert analysis. Perform, manage, lead with Mind Tools for Business. Visit mindtoolsbusiness.com to find out more.
Rob Clark has been very active as usual. This month he's interviewing Kathy Hoy about CLO 100. He's talking to Kim Ellis of the Freelance Support Network, as well as Nick Jones from Blue Eskimo, looking at the state of the recruitment market in L&D. Always a good package from Rob.
Elevating L&D leaders into strategic positions. We hear from Kathy Hoy, co-founder of CLO 100. A new network group is about to launch, offering business support for L&D freelancers. Recruiter Nick Jones returns, looking at employer relations in the sector. We feature a new programme for L&D practitioners to experience the ins and outs of learning operations and get a qualification. What is more important to an organisation, if anything, than it and its people learning? Yet, ironically, learning and development teams often lack the ability at the most senior levels in business to really influence learning. We've come to CLO 100's Learning Leaders programme. It believes L&D leaders have the potential to dramatically influence organisational success and aims to elevate leaders in L&D to strategic positions within their organisation. It's a 12-month programme on strategic learning leadership, and today we're with the first cohort. Its organiser is, of course, Kathy Hoy. Kathy, hello. Why is learning leadership failing at the moment?
I'm not sure I'd say that learning leadership is failing as such. I think that there's some brilliant people out there doing some amazing things. That's actually probably something we're not great at highlighting enough in our industry, to be honest. But there are things that I see as common challenges that have been challenges for years. And I think that's what we're just not getting better. So things like business alignment, for example, and making sure that everything we do is really relevant and adding value to the organisation. We created the programme really for two main reasons. One was to help heads of learning have a more strategic level of influence within their organisation, and the other was to help them create a high-performing learning organisation. And I think the key there is on the high-performing bit. We all talk about learning organisations being a great thing, but actually we really need to have that emphasis on performance and improving performance within our businesses.
A career as a freelancer attracts many practitioners in L&D. Working for yourself, flexibility and job satisfaction coupled with the nature of the work make it a popular career choice. A common challenge, often underestimated, is building a freelance business and your own personal brand. A new network for L&D freelancers is being set up to help. Its co-founder is Kim Ellis, an independent training consultant with experience as both a freelancer and a network leader.
There isn't a great deal out there that is just for the freelancers, just for the self-employed, or the people that run small businesses, maybe where there's just a handful of people. There's a lot out there about how to manage a training team, how to build training, all of that. We already know that as freelancers. So what else can we learn? It's run by freelancers. And when I say freelancers, I mean anybody that is self-employed, anybody that works self-employed in the L&D space. When you start out, you need to know, do you need a niche? Do you need a portfolio? What to include in a portfolio? Navigating NDAs from clients, from previous employers, all these things. How do you increase your social media engagement? How do you apply for a tender? All of this, collaboration, it's needed.
Cognota has introduced a 3-month programme for learning and business professionals to experience the ins and outs of learning operations. The programme is accredited by the International Association for Continuing Education and Training, and Rebecca McDougall from Cognota joins me. Rebecca, thanks so much for coming on. What's the LearnOps Academy?
The LearnOps Academy is the industry's first accredited learning operations program that's built by a community of thought leaders and experts. The program is 3 months long, and that includes asynchronous video lessons, direct coaching sessions from chief learning officers, and engaging case studies and peer cohort groups. As mentioned, the curriculum is ISET certified and CEU eligible, and it's really designed to help corporate teams align on and introduce a learning operations framework to their business, or for individuals who might be looking to upskill or in career transition.
The annual work and salary survey for L&D looks at employer relations and job satisfaction. What does the data show?
Consistently a relatively happy industry. When we do any kind of research, any kind of report that we do, and we ask people consistently, over half of people are generally happy in their role. It fluctuates from year to year, but the macroeconomic circumstances can have an impact on that. 18% of people say that there's no opportunity to progress versus 6% last year. And the negativity is creeping in through uncertainty. And we have to remember, as I said earlier, that L&D itself is not a sector, it's a function within all sectors. So, of course, it's not necessarily a reflection on L&D itself, Rob, you know. Employer relations haven't substantively changed. 60%, for example, remain the same. And I think that that's down to a focus on employer value proposition, recruitment, and particularly retention of staff that was pushed in post-pandemic because, of course, there was a tight labour market. We needed to be as attractive as possible and to keep and retain people as much as possible. So those positive EVP trends have kind of seeped through. And, of course, L&D plays a big part in that relationship, as does benefits and just general stability and confidence.
And that's Learning News this July. Thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Back to Kate and Nigel.
Are you productive or are you just busy? At Happy, we run a Productivity Blitz course. It runs for a whole week, 15 minutes in the morning, 15 minutes in the afternoon, with 10 top tips. Those who came on the course found they gained 38 minutes in productivity each day. So let us help you be more productive.
Martin, it is time for another research report. So welcome and tell us what we're going to be looking at today.
Thanks, Nigel. Nice to be back. Today, we're going to look at a report, or a piece of research rather, that we've looked at previously. It comes out every year. It's the state of the global workplace, and it's the subtext is the voice of the world's employees, and it's produced by Gallup, and they have been producing this for many, many years. So it's a big research report in the calendar, if you like.
So what is happening about this? What is different about it? Because in previous times when we've looked at this report, we've said, most people are actively disengaged. Yet again, fewer people are actively engaged. Yet again. Have they done something different? Is it coming up with different data?
Yeah, yes, it is quite different this year. And it's different because the focus is well-being. It really does go big on that topic. So it's giving lots of data points around well-being. It's certainly giving some data points around engagement, like it does every year. But this year, it's really getting into the weeds of how people are feeling at work and the kind of impact that is having.
What I was going to say, Martin, I just jumped in. I'm sorry to interrupt. What I was going to say is, for the first time, it's actually looking at people's lives, not just their working life.
Yeah.
So it's people in context a bit more now.
Yeah. So I'll just quote you from it, because I think there's an awful lot in this report. It's 150 pages long. You can get an executive summary, but there's tons of detail here. And for all the detail that you can click off to indicator type pages on the Gallup website. So they really do break down the data. I think it's really, really interesting, and there's a lot there. So actually, it's worth spending a bit of time digging through it. But interestingly, they talk about the kind of experience of life that you've just mentioned, and their definition is: we measure how employees experience their lives. Key wellbeing measures include life evaluation, daily negative emotions, burnouts, and how strongly employees believe their organisation cares about their well-being. So the research isn't afraid to go into details around things like loneliness, for example. The research says that 20% of employees experience daily loneliness. Now, that is higher if you work from home, and it is even higher if you're unemployed. So basically, the being at work, does lead to social interaction, and so you feel less lonely. But it asks these kind of questions. Did you feel a lot of sadness yesterday? Is one of the questions. Did you feel a lot of anger? Do you feel stress? So, those are the questions that are being asked, and then it paints this picture of the fact that people are, not that happy at work.
Yes, it's very interesting. And it's also a theme coming through that younger people seem to be suffering more acutely than older workforce. So, for example, this loneliness, the average is 20%, but it's 22% of those under 35 and only 19% of those over 35, which, it's not a big gap, but it's still a gap. And that seems to be reflected right through the report. And if you look at the kind of well-being gap, there's the gap, which was pretty close, under 35 and over 35, come to this year, and the gap has widened to 5 points gap, I think, between the two. And that's quite significant, I would argue.
Yeah.
Well-being by age, the gap is 5%.
So I think there are red flags here. I mean, it's hard not to be alarmed by some of this data. For example, this life evaluation that you're talking about. The research shows that 34% of respondents are thriving, 58% are struggling, and 8% are suffering. So, that's if that reflects your workforce, then there's clearly quite a lot of work to be done to help them feel like they're thriving, or to move them along to the thriving bits, because the vast majority are struggling in life and at work.
And they've broken it down, haven't they, into different clusters of the world. And Europe seems to be a little bit worse than everywhere else that I could find. Is that true?
Crikey, you've put me on the spot there. I've looked at the overarching high-level results, and actually I've been looking at some of those kind of stats around how much stress people are suffering, what the engagement is, what the manager type data. So I haven't looked at the pages and pages and pages of different geographic areas. So I need to look at that. And if that is the case in Europe, then that's also something that I think employers need to look at, because this report, like all the reports we look at, it's effectively about putting a mirror up to the organisation, saying, is this what this looks like for us? And if it is, then what can we do about it? I mean,
I've got the European page up, and it's saying that if you rank overall, Europe is quite low, but Romania have got 36% engaged, Albania 27%, Iceland 26%. The UK is right at the bottom with 10% actively engaged. They're almost, the very bottom is France with 7%, but 10% is pretty low. So we're on a par with Poland and Ireland and Austria. And then all the other countries in Europe, all the other 34 or whatever, are above us. So that's a fairly shocking figure. And if you look at things like life evaluation, we're right bang down at the bottom of that too. 15th, in fact, in life evaluation. And daily stress, we're 15th. and daily anger, we're 10th. So these are not great. Daily sadness, we are second, but at 27% feel daily sadness. So it's like we're almost basket cases here as a nation. The job climate we're down the bottom of the job climate market. And interestingly, Denmark, Iceland, Netherlands, Norway are top of the job climate list. So those kind of things are slightly to be expected. But it doesn't paint a very happy picture, does it, really?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things. Firstly, the trend is just that. I mean, workplaces are not becoming happier places. And of course, there's a paradox, because we have this kind of period of kind of technological progress right now, but at the same time, it looks like we've got employees who really just aren't as happy as or engaged as they potentially need to be for organisations to properly harness the potential of some of this technology. I mean, I'm joining dots there, but really, the new technology that's at our fingertips now, especially with generative AI, requires us to be really innovative in our thinking and to be exploring ways in which technology can help transform the organisation. And I don't know, but it doesn't sound like it's a great picture of people just aren't motivated, really. They're just fairly unhappy in their work. Doesn't sound like a great foundation for people to be, really engaged with change and working out how to do things differently.
Which is what we're saying is essential, aren't we? We're saying that those things, the willingness to change your skill set, are fundamental for survival. And yet, as you say, the climate seems to be poor for that to actually happen.
Yeah, but I think, looking at all these research reports and looking at what I would call actionable insight, I would be looking at, whether you're in HR or learning, what are you to make of this kind of insight? Because basically, if you know that there are some bigger issues at play for your colleagues, then no amount of learning is going to solve some of these much bigger challenges. And I think this potentially is where HR, learning, talent needs to get a lot more involved, really. It's actually, I think the trend is there's not a lot of engagement, right? 23% of employees are engaged globally, 15% actively disengaged. You read out the UK and Europe's stats, it's woeful. So how's that going to change exactly? And what is the role of the functions that are responsible for the people operations in that change? And I think this kind of data really does, it throws up red flags, but it also shows some of the ways in which organizations could start to address it. Things that before we came on to this to do the interview, we were talking about the role of managers, for example. 30% of managers are engaged globally. But actually, if you've got a good manager, the report also says that you can have a lot more success with the team. So that's not new news for anyone in learning, that managers are a key focus. But we haven't cracked that one yet. We have to really try and crack that, because it will have a big impact on teams.
Managers are responsible for 70% of the disengagement. So it's 70% the fault of poor management. Well, they do give us three things that organizations should pay attention to. One is, funnily enough, high priority on manager hiring and manager development. Secondly, to integrate engagement into every stage of the employee and manager lifestyle. And thirdly, to emphasize well-being at work and in life. That's an agenda, isn't it, to start with, whether you begin to meet those criteria if you're looking at this report as an organization. And it's a pretty good place to start. So what do you think, Martin? Sum it up. I actually think this report is quite a wake-up call in a way that I've tended to look at the others and go, oh, yeah, another lot of disengagement. Oh, yeah. Nothing much new going on. Whereas this seems to me to reflect that bigger context. And that's actually quite a wake-up call.
I think so. I would agree with that. And I think I would also think about, what you can do with it. And I think, you talked about those 3 areas that the report authors flag up. I would also go back to the 12 elements that make up what Gallup call engagement. I would look at those. They're in the report. Things like, I know what's expected of me at work. I have the materials and equipment to do my job. I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. I would go back to basics. I would look at that list and go, can we tick off all those 12 elements in the way that we operate and our people operate in this business? Because if you can, that will probably start to see some kind of impact on those other 3 areas that you just described. So I think that those 12 elements are really worth going back to. That would be my final point, just to remind ourselves of actually what engagement looks like.
Well, thank you, Martin. I think that's a very good summary and some good insight into this massive report, where to put your focus. It's available. It's free download. It's a huge amount of work. It must be a massive undertaking by Gallup every year, but it puts them on the map in a very significant way. Everybody quotes it once it's out, and we've done the same today, Martin. We've quoted it and we've recommended it, and we hope people read it. So, Martin, thank you so much for talking us through, and thank you for selecting this as a worthwhile report for us to review.
Well, that's it. 60 minutes of sunshine to get you through your July. Hopefully some of you are in the world with real sunshine as well. But Nigel, what stood out for you? What rays of sunlight stood out for you this month?
Not really a ray, but a blast of sunshine through Nick Shackleton-Jones. Lots of great ideas around leadership development. And what he's saying is radical and different. And that is that leaders are not vanilla. You lead here, you lead there, you lead somewhere else. It's all the same thing. He's saying that leadership has to be tailored to the organization. And I agree with him, leadership in context. But he's also saying that it's not courses, it's not content. It's actually experiences that make a leader. And therefore you have to create viable, realistic experiences, which actually change people, the way they behave. And it's only when you've changed behavior that you start to get anything that is really useful and enduring. So he's all about leadership development that changes people and the way they behave forever. And I totally agree with him. So it was a really interesting conversation. And it's based on a LinkedIn post. So you can try, if you go to Nick Shackleton-Jones, you can read the post, listen to the interview. You get a really rounded view of his take on leadership.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I really like the piece around it not being vanilla, because I think context is everything. And that links back to a lot of the work that you've done around organizational cultures, learning cultures. But I do believe that content is useful. If I want to improve or learn anything, yes, you need to apply it. But I think that some of that study, some of that, that inspiration can support it as well. So as ever, I always find Nick challenges those boundaries. So it's really great to have him on.
It is always good to have him on. So, that to me, that was the highlight of the programme, and well worth everybody looking at that and looking at it again, maybe. There's a lot of meat and
100%. Now we're in.
So what's
Well, we're
happening,
into
Kate?
the summer months, so no events in the short term, but we're back in September with our friends at the LPI running Learning Live on the 11th and 12th.
Yes.
I'll be actually jetting off after that to HR Tech in Vegas, so I'll bring back some takeaways from that. World of Learning is at the NEC in October on the 8th of 9th in Birmingham. Unleash is happening in Paris on the 17th and 18th of October. CIPD annual conference is 6th to 7th of November up in Manchester. And DevLearn is happening in Vegas, again, 6th to 8th of November. And then right the way through to the Learning Technologies Awards, a bit of a festive end to the event season on the 13th of November. So lots for us to be talking about. I always find that time of year quite informative for the year ahead, like what's the reflections on the year to date, how are budgets looking, what are the plans for next year, what are some of those big rocks that people are looking to move. So I always really enjoy that autumn term, if you like.
It's a big block of insight. The other one we've missed is the Learning Conference in Orlando, which is in early December. That's still running and currently taking bookings. So even if you can get to one thing, if you can get to more than one thing, you do get a real sense of the way the industry as a whole is moving and what people are thinking about and what they're actually implementing and doing. So that's kind of helpful, and it helps you plan for the new year. So it comes at the right
and if
time,
you can't get there, we'll do our best to bring you as much insight and inspiration as we can. We are back in August, my favourite month of the year, and it's the day before my birthday, my 21st birthday, on the 22nd of August. So join us then if you can.
22nd of August, yes. Okay, Kate, forever young. We'll see you there, and we'll be wishing Kate a very happy birthday in that programme.
Bye.